Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chronicles of Hollywood History, Past, Present, and Future. Welcome. And here now, Cory Gomez.
Hello everyone and welcome. Today I am joined by Douglas Schwartz. He is one of the creators of Baywatch, and he's also got a book out called From Bar Mitzvah to Baywatch. Thank you so much for joining me today. I guess first things first, can you tell me a little bit about your book?
Yeah, hi Cory. It's my pleasure to talk to you today. The book is called From Bar Mitzvah to Baywatch, and the reason that title is significant is I grew up in Hollywood in a show business family, and on my 13th birthday it was my bar mitzvah. And so my parents threw me a big party, and after the party I was given an 8mm, Super 8mm movie camera by my uncle Schwartz, who created the iconic television series Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. And Sherwood gave me this Super 8mm movie camera because he knew I was interested in becoming a filmmaker, even at the age of 13 in 1958, when there were no kids making films in those days at all. There was no video, there was nothing. So my other relatives gave me cash, and I took all that cash and put it together, and along with my first cousin, Michael Berk, who our mothers were sisters, we decided to make our little movie called The Lost Battalion, which we wrote together. We produced it together. I directed it. We starred in it with my other cousins and friends who were the same age, 12, 13 years old. My mother was the cameraman. We spent $300 on the movie. we filmed it up in the Hollywood Hills, and we ended up editing it, putting titles to it, adding a soundtrack, dialogue, music. So it was 25 minutes long, and it was about a squad of Marines trapped on Guam during World War II who had to cross the island and get to the beach to be rescued by a helicopter. That was the basic storyline. Along the way, they rescued 2 French girls. And so that was the story of Lost Battalion, and we made this movie, spent the $300 from my Bar Mitzvah fund, and to make our money back and maybe make a profit, I talked my parents into letting me have showings at our house in the Hollywood Hills, where I knew the relatives would come and the neighbors and friends would come. We charged a quarter admission. We sold popcorn and candy and soft drinks in a concession stand. And over the 2 screenings during the summer, we ended up making about $500. So I made our $300 back and a $200 profit, and everyone loved the film that these 2 young 13-year-olds made. And one of my father also was the co-creator of Jackie Gleason's The Honeymooners with Art Carney, and so he produced that show. He was also an Emmy Award-winning writer-producer, just like my Uncle Sherwood. So an executive from CBS Television City, where my dad was the executive producer, head writer of the Red Skelton Hour at that time in 1958, decided that he was so impressed with this little movie, he asked my father to drive us down to 62nd year this year. But Baywatch was our most successful show. And Baywatch premiered on September 24th, 1989. We just celebrated our 30-year anniversary in 2019. And we ended up a year ago, and we ended up producing 308 episodes of the series. And that was the most successful show. We actually ended up with the Guinness World Book of Records as the most watched television series in the history of television, with the largest audience ever officially recorded at 1.2 billion people weekly in 158 countries and 42 different languages, airing on every continent on Earth, including Antarctica. And that was the only show that had a billion viewer audience weekly. And so that made history. So our book, from Baywatch, from Bar Mitzvah to Baywatch, is that story and that journey.
Now, before we talk about Baywatch, what were the other shows that you did?
Well, two of them were Baywatch spinoffs. So Baywatch, we did 200 episodes of Baywatch for NBC, and then in first-run syndication. And then we spun off, because the show was so successful, we spun off our first series, which was called Baywatch Nights. And that was because David Hasselhoff always wanted to get out of swim trunks and be Magnum PI. He wanted to drive a red Ferrari and be a detective. And so we had Baywatch by day and Baywatch Nights by night. The two shows were on simultaneously. They were on at the same time. So there were two different versions of Baywatch. So we would do 22 episodes of Baywatch and 22 episodes of Baywatch Nights every year, 44 episodes a year. And we did that for 2 years. So that was the second series. The third series was Baywatch Hawaii, which we did 2 years, 44 episodes of Baywatch Hawaii as well. And that is the show that we discovered Jason Momoa, who at 19 years old joined the cast of Baywatch Hawaii. We actually found Jason, who is, if you don't know who he is, he's Aquaman.
Oh, my wife knows who he is, definitely.
He's a handsome fellow, and he was impressive. We went into a surf shop to buy my kids surf equipment in Hawaii, and he was the guy, the salesman behind the counter, and that's how we met Jason. And he was, very impressive. 6'4", handsome man, great physique. Asked him if he was an actor, and he said no, he was a model in Hawaii. He had never acted before. I asked him if he would come in and audition for one of the roles in the new series Baywatch Hawaii. So he came in reluctantly, but he came in, and we were so impressed with him, we gave him the part. He did all 44 episodes of the series, and that's what started his career. We actually, there were a few different people that were on Baywatch that we launched their careers. Pamela Anderson, who we found, she was the Blue Zone girl in Canada, Blue Zone beer, and she ended up coming down here to do a photo session for Playboy, and Hugh Hefner was so impressed with her, he called me and said, we have a new girl here from Canada that I think would be perfect on Baywatch. You should meet her. And so we met Pam, and she was very impressive, again, just like Jason Momoa, and we ended up casting her back in 1991, and she ended up doing Baywatch for 6 years, over 120 shows, I think, and she became iconic, one of the biggest stars in the world. And Gina Lee Nolan is another one. So there were quite a few different stars. David Hasselhoff came to us from Knight Rider. But going back to the series that I've got, so it's Baywatch, Baywatch Nights, Baywatch Hawaii. Another series I created was a show for Hulk Hogan called Thunder in Paradise.
I love Thunder in Paradise.
Well, I created that show again with my cousin Michael, and I met Hulk Hogan at a WrestleMania event in Las Vegas. I was there because of Baywatch. He was there because he's Hulk Hogan, and he was very impressed with Baywatch, loved the series, and said, you should create something for me. And it just so happened that I had a script called Trouble in Paradise, which we had written for 20th Century Fox Studios, and it didn't go forward, but I thought it was a perfect script for him, a really good character role of an ex-Navy SEAL. And he had kind of a buddy partner, and we ended up casting Chris Lemmon, Jack Lemmon's son, in the secondary part. And then Carol Alt became the television. So we would do 22 Baywatches, 22 Thunder in Paradises, 22 Baywatches, 22 more Thunder in Paradises, and then 22 Baywatches, 22 Baywatch nights, and we go on and on like that. So we were averaging 44 episodes a year, and in between, we were writing pilots for other series. And another series that I created was Sheena, Queen of the Jungle.
Great show.
That was starring Gina Lee Nolan. And I did 3 years of that, 50 episodes, and we shot that at Disney World, which is also where we shot Thunder in Paradise. And Thunder in Paradise was a very big show, and the storylines took us all over the world. And on a syndication budget, which was $1 million per episode, I didn't know how we were going to afford it, but I had gone to Disney World with my kids, and Disney World is 44,000 square acres of what I saw as a back lot, a studio back lot. I could go to Epcot and shoot Japan and China and France and England and Mexico because they had pavilions that were authentic to that country's culture. So I could shoot all over Epcot. I could shoot in the parks all over Disney World. I have the Disney MGM studios available to me. So we got 2 sound stages there, and we got all of that, including the availability of their props department, their vehicle department, everything you could think of we got for free. Didn't pay anything, and the only thing I had to do was have Hulk Hogan and Chris Lemon wave at the fans in the trams when they went on tours, and therefore I was able to sell Disney on the fact that we were actually an attraction at the Disney MGM studios, because people would come and see an actual television series being filmed. So we did those 2 years of Thunder in Paradise literally at Disney World, and never left the Disney World property, even though the show traveled all over the world. And even the lagoon at Disney World is where we had the Thunder boat, and if we needed ocean work, we just went off the coast of Florida and did the ocean work second unit. So when Sheena came around, I remembered how successful we were using Disney World for Thunder in Paradise. So I thought, well, here's Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Where can I go to shoot a show? I can't afford to go to Africa and shoot it in Africa or South Africa. But what if I go back to Disney World and we shot the series at the Disney Wild Animal Park? Well, the Disney Wild Animal Park is about 100 acres of pure Africa. And the difference was I had giraffes and zebras and elephants and all sorts of animals running around in what looked like open terrain. There were actually ditches that separated the animals, but you couldn't see them because they had brush growing over them. So I could shoot the series and have Sheena running around with all these wild animals, and you'd swear we were in Africa. Actually, we had more animals than we would have had in Africa because they were all contained in these 100 acres of Disney World Wild Animal Park. So that series shot there for 3 years, again at Disney World, never left the property. And another series that I created, the 5th series, was a show called Higher Ground. And that was a little different. Higher Ground was a show that starred Joe Lando, who was the star of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, with Jane Seymour. He was the good-looking guy against Jane Seymour, the love interest in that series for CBS, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And so the show was about a mountain high school in Colorado for kids that were acting out and their parents couldn't control them. They had drug problems and other problems, social problems, and just dealing with life. And when the high schools in their cities and their parents couldn't deal with them any longer, they were taken, in some cases by force, to this mountain high school where Joe Lando played the head psychologist who would work with these kids and help them. And they had to stay on property and so forth, and it became a mountain high school in Colorado, and we turned around a lot of lives. And so that was a very emotionally driven series. I produced that for Lionsgate Television, and it was aired on the Fox Family Channel, and we did 22 episodes of that series. So those are the television series that I created that got on the air, and if you total that up, plus the 27 TV movies that we wrote and produced, in the 80s, we were kind of the kings of CBS movies. And you remember when it was used to be in the 80s, movies of the week.
Yes.
The Monday night movie, the Sunday night movie. CBS had movies on 2 or 3 nights a week at that point. So did NBC and ABC. They all had movies.
Mm-hmm.
So we did one movie after the other. The very first movie that we did, I'm going to go back to 1978. In 1978, we wrote a movie called Goldie and the Boxer, and it starred O.J. Simpson. And he played, it was a period piece after the war in 1945. The war's ended. Joe Gallagher, played by O.J. Simpson, came out, and he was a boxer in the service, and he was looking for a job, and he meets this little girl, who is an 8-year-old little girl, named Goldie, and she ends up bringing him to the compound where her father is getting ready to fight, and he becomes a sparring partner for her father. Her father dies, and Joe Gallagher, O.J. Simpson, becomes the fighter that is going to go, like Rocky, to face the championship fighter. So it was a very colorful film. O.J. Simpson was terrific. It aired on NBC in 1978 and became the highest-rated movie of the year on NBC, and in fact was so successful that NBC picked up a sequel called Goldie Goes to Hollywood, and it's where O.J. Simpson kind of goes Hollywood from being this prizefighter, Rocky-style guy, and Goldie becomes like his daughter. So it was the relationship of those two. So we did 2 of the Goldie and the Boxer movies, and the success of that, CBS approached us and gave us an overall deal, a 3-picture deal, to write some movies for CBS Movies of the Week. And the first movie we wrote in 1979 was The Incredible Journey of Dr. Meg Laurel. And that was about holistic medicine in rural Appalachia in the early 1900s. And, you know, who's going to watch a movie about holistic medicine in Appalachia? Well, it turns out that we got Lindsay Wagner, who had just won Best Actress for Bionic Woman. We got Jane Wyman out of retirement. She had been retired for 20 years to play a medicine doctor in the mountains. And Lindsay Wagner played a modern medicine woman who had graduated in Boston from a university, and she wanted to bring modern medicine to rural Appalachia against this Jane Wyman medicine woman who was holistic medicine. And the two of them clashed through the whole thing. It was CBS's first 3-hour movie. So the movie aired in 1979 from 8 to 11. The whole night was one movie. We were the first 3-hour movie ever to be produced for any network. It ended up doing an extraordinary 53 share. That meant more than half of the people watching television at that time watched our show, and it became the highest-rated movie for any network that year. It won several Emmy Awards and Golden Globe Awards, and so that kicked us into our 3-picture deal with CBS. The second movie we did was The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd with Dennis Weaver. And The Ordeal of Dr. Mudd was based on an amazing true story of Dr. Samuel Mudd, who was the doctor in the 1800s who, when John Wilkes Booth shot President Lincoln and assassinated him at the Ford's Theater, he jumped off the stage and broke his leg when he jumped off the stage and fled. And in the middle of the night, Dr. Mudd hears a pounding on his door in the Virginia countryside. And so he goes to his door, and there's a guy that said he fell off his horse and broke his leg, and he brings him into the house, and he sets his leg in the middle of the night, tells them they can spend the night, and they're sweaty and anxious to get out of there, but they're going to spend the night until the next day. And then he leaves the next morning and goes off. And then Dr. Mudd hears that President Lincoln was assassinated, and they're looking for a guy that broke his leg that assassinated him. So he, Dr. Mudd, calls the soldiers to his house to tell them about this guy that came to his house the night before, and he set his leg. The soldiers then went after Booth, cornered him in a barn, shot and killed him. So they came back to Dr. Mudd and asked Dr. Mudd to accompany them back to Washington to be questioned about what he knew about John Wilkes Booth. And when he came in there, Secretary of War Stanton decided to prosecute Dr. Mudd for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in a conspiracy, and charged him with that. And in fact, in a military tribunal, he wasn't even in the military. He was court-martialed and sentenced to life imprisonment on Devil's Island. And know that America had a Devil's Island in the Dry Tortugas off Florida. It's off Florida, Key West. And it's 60 miles out in the ocean from Key West is an island in the Dry Tortugas, and they built a military fort there, which became Devil's Island Prison. So the ordeal of Dr. Mudd was that story. And that, again, became a high-rated movie for CBS. It was another 3-hour movie. So we did the Journey of Dr. McLaurel, 3-hour movie, then we did Dr. Mudd, 3-hour movie. Again, we won Emmy Awards. We were nominated for Best Movie of the Year, a Golden Globe Award for that. And so we were doing movie after movie after movie. We did 8 movies in a row for CBS in the 80s, and we were under contract to Sir Lou Grade at Marble Art Studios. So all the movies that we did, we had a studio partner for a network, and we were young guys just doing this, but, you know, we had been working together since Lost Battalion when we were bar mitzvahed in 1958, and now in the 80s, and, you know, we were still doing it, but now for major networks. So ended up doing 8 movies in a row, and then we got a phone call from our agent who said that the president of 20th Century Fox Television wanted to have us come in. He was interested in making an overall deal with us to come and join him on the Fox lot to develop a television series. Well, we had never done a television series before. We had just done these movies. So he said, well, given your bloodline with your Uncle Sherwood and your dad, Al Schwartz, you know, I bet you guys have series in you, so I'm betting on you guys to come up with a good series. The first series that we came up with was a show called Manimal,
Awesome
which
show.
was Manimal was for NBC, 20th Century Fox. It was our very first series, and we were the executive producers of that show. And it was Simon McCorkindale who could actually turn into animals. He was a shapeshifter, so he could become a wild animal. He could turn into a panther, a hawk, a snake, you name it, he could turn into it. So as a police detective, we were doing crime stories with a unique twist, with a high concept of being a shape-shifting detective. Animal behaviorist. So that was our very first series for NBC. Our second series was a show called The Wizard with David Rappaport, and that was for CBS, and that premiered in 1986. And The Wizard starred a dwarf. David Rappaport was the actor from the movie Time Bandits, which we loved him in. He was the dwarf leader of the Time Bandits. I don't know if you remember that movie.
I do.
Well, he was the lead dwarf in that, with a group of dwarfs, if you remember that storyline. So we were impressed with him, and we thought it would be terrific to develop a series for him. So CBS and Fox thought we were crazy because, you know, he's a dwarf. No show has ever developed a series for a dwarf before. Again, this is back in the 80s. But we had it in our head that he would play Simon McKay, who was an extraordinary scientist. He was a nuclear physicist developing weapons of mass destruction for the Pentagon. And he was a brilliant mind, but he hated doing that. All he wanted to do was build toys of wonder for kids that were disabled and help them overcome their disabilities by building toys that would generate hopes and beliefs in them that would help their situations. And it was a very, again, emotionally driven show. So he leaves the Pentagon. He goes out to Los Angeles and moves into a house on Elm Street. The show was originally called The Wizard of Elm Street. And kids would love to come by because he had these wondrous toys that he would create. But he was so important to the government, and he had so much knowledge about nuclear weapons and other things, that they had 2 Secret Service agents live with him. So the show was David Rappaport playing the wizard with 2 Secret Service agents and a housekeeper played by Fran Ryan, and we had robots and other things, and it was a big hit on CBS, and we did 22 episodes, and it was going really well. We were on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock against the Cosby Show, so our ratings were tough because of that, and we were an hour show, and we were against Cosby and Family Ties when they were at their height. But even with that, CBS was going to give us a second year of the show, and we were going to do another 22 episodes when David Rappaport, unfortunately, committed suicide. And we couldn't believe it, because here he was, the wizard, inspiring people and the fact that this boy was embarrassed because he had a dwarf as a father, David Rappaport was really affected by that, and ended up, that was one of the big reasons that he was depressed, and he ended his life. So we didn't go and do 22 more episodes. So that was unfortunate, but given the fact that we did Manimal and The Wizard, which were both very unique, different shows from what typically was on television, we got a phone call again from our agents that said Grant Tinker, who was the original partner, founder of MTM Productions. His wife was Mary Tyler Moore, and he did shows like The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Rhoda and Bob Newhart and all those classic comedies, and that was Grant Tinker. And so he became the chairman of NBC. He had just left the chairmanship of NBC and was able to get financing with a company called Gannett, which is a big publishing company. So he formed a new studio called GTG Entertainment, Grant Tinker Gannett, and they bought the Culver Studios, which is an old classic studio where they made Gone with the Wind back in the 30s. And he refurbished the studio, and the very first deal that he made was with Michael and I to come over to GTG and again try our hand at finding a new television series because he had a deal with NBC. And so we joined GTG and we created Baywatch, was for NBC and Grant Tinker. Excuse me, and that was in 1988. In 1988, we did the pilot, which was called Baywatch Panic at Malibu Pier, which Michael and I wrote and produced, and it was a movie, a 2-hour movie. It aired on NBC. Once again, we had the highest rated movie on NBC the entire year, and because of that success of Panic at Malibu Pier, Baywatch was picked up in May of 1989 as a weekly series, and then we did 24 episodes of Baywatch on NBC that year in 1989 through 1990. The show was very successful, airing on Friday nights at 8 o'clock. We did those 24 hours, and at the end of it, we expected a second season of Baywatch because NBC told us they were going to give us a second season. So we had already started developing it when Gannett, the publishing company that was financing Grant Tinker's GTG, decided to pull out their funding because they didn't want to be in television any longer. They just wanted to focus on their publishing empire. So without the funding, GTG had to close as a studio, and he Grant Tinker, informed NBC that he could no longer co-fund Baywatch because they were putting up $400,000 per episode, and NBC was putting up $900,000 per episode. It was $1.3 million per episode between the two, GTG and NBC. So without GTG putting up $400,000 an episode, NBC decided to cancel Baywatch. That was the reason it was canceled, not because of lack of ratings, but because of the lack of funding from Gannett pulling out. That turned out to be a terrible day for Michael and I, but in fact, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. And it's because our Uncle Sherwood, again, Sherwood Schwartz, Gilligan's Island, Brady Bunch, Sherwood Schwartz, who gave me that 8mm movie camera at my bar mitzvah, said to Michael and I, this is your opportunity to have your own Gilligan's Island. You should go back to Grant Tinker if his studio is closing and Gannett is no longer funding him and NBC has dropped their license, but you have a hit show internationally. I bet you can go to your international partners and get them to fund a second season of Baywatch without NBC if you take it to first-run syndication. First-run syndication at that point in time in 1990, there were no shows that were 1-hour action-adventure series because they couldn't afford to do them. And at $1.3 million per episode on NBC, you couldn't get enough money to fund a show in syndication. So we found out what was the most that we could get altogether, $800,000 per episode. So we then had to cut our budget by $500,000 per episode to do the same exact show. So we first went to David Hassel. We first went to Grant Tinker and told him that we wanted to try to launch Baywatch and do a second season on our own without him, without GTG, and without NBC. And we wanted to buy our rights back for our own series, which we did, and we offered him $10. And that $10 got us a 1-year option for 100% of the worldwide for $10.
Wow.
And with that $10 investment and that 1 year we went to our foreign partners, like Uncle Sherwood suggested, and we cobbled together $800,000 per episode. We were able to cut the budget significantly by $500,000, and still doing the show in 35 millimeter in Los Angeles, full IA, same cast, David Hasselhoff and the other cast members. We were able to make deals with the IA and the Teamsters, and even David Hasselhoff. We were able to cut his salary in half by giving him an executive producing credit. David wasn't an executive producer or a producer at all on the first season of NBC, but in the first season of syndication, he became an executive producer. We knew that would appeal to him, but it was in exchange for cutting his salary 50%. So we put together all of these things, and we did the first season of syndication with a small company called All American Television. They were the distributors, and we were struggling the first year in syndication in 1990. But with the addition of Pamela Anderson and some of the other beauties that we had that came on the show, our show all of a sudden started exploding in the ratings, and we went from 2.3 rating, which is low, to a 4.5 rating, which is much better, all the way up to a 10.6 rating from a 2.3 rating. So we literally tripled, if not quadrupled, our ratings. And that became, we were the number one show in syndication. We were airing in 96% of the entire country on independent stations, not a network. So it wasn't NBC or CBS or ABC network. It were independent stations. Like in Los Angeles, we were on Channel 13 KCOP. In New York, we were on WOR. So there were different affiliations and different syndicated stations that became our network, in essence, 96% of the country. We had 296 individual stations that made up our network for Baywatch and syndication. And then our show started expanding internationally, again, to 158 countries. And we ended up with 1.2 billion, got the Guinness World Book of Records, became the number one show in the world. We outrated all the network shows, and we were doing them for 1/3 of what the network shows were, costing $2-3 million an episode, and we were doing our show for $800,000. So that was this basic story of Baywatch, and Michael and I oversaw. We were the showrunner, executive producers. We wrote almost every episode. I directed 67 episodes myself. We produced every show. And on top of all that I'm telling you, Cory, I am legally blind. I have been legally blind my entire career. I was legally blind in 1958, but I didn't know it. I had a hereditary eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. And that disease, the peripheral vision, everyone, when you look straight ahead, you have typically 160-degree vision side to side peripherally. My vision was 10 degrees right in front of me. I thought everybody saw like that. But it turns out that people have peripheral vision. I didn't even know that existed. I didn't realize that I was legally blind, but I was. So everything that I'm telling you, those 600 hours of television, all the series, all the movies, all the writing, producing, and even directing, I'm the only legally blind member of the Directors Guild, and I directed 67 episodes of Baywatch in spite of the fact. And that had a lot to do with going back to the Wizard and inspiring people with disabilities. And so I've always been trying to uplift people and inspire people to overcome their obstacles, overcome their handicaps and disabilities. So whether it be the Wizard or whether it be Baywatch, that's why we did a lot of very emotionally driven stories on Baywatch, because we had 1 billion people that we were able to affect every week with storylines. We even did a storyline that my wife wrote. My wife, again, being a family operation, Michael and I and my wife Debbie now, she wrote 45 episodes of Baywatch. And her episodes were all emotionally driven, and she did one episode that was dedicated to David Rappaport about a dwarf who had a full-size son in junior lifeguards on the beach. And the whole Baywatch episode was about this father struggling with the acceptance of his son. And it goes back to the reason that David Rappaport committed suicide, and we dedicated that show to David. And it was very affecting, and it was something I directed, my wife wrote, but we did a lot of episodes telling lies, but he couldn't see, and he didn't want to admit that he didn't have peripheral vision. So he was missing rescues, and he ended up being diagnosed with RP. And so we did episodes that were emotionally driven, not just sexy and not just, action adventure, but meaningful storylines. And I think that had a lot to do with our success. I'll stop talking for a minute so you can have a word in here if you like.
Actually, I do have a question. Now, you had Jason Momoa, you had discovered, you had brought in Pam Anderson, before she was a big star. Was David Hasselhoff, because he was, Knight Rider, of course, was he always the guy? Was he always like your first choice, or did he come in and audition just like everyone else?
Well, he came in and auditioned it wasn't an audition like you'd think, that he comes in and reads lines and we give him a scene to read and see if we like his acting. We knew he was David Hasselhoff, who had done 120 episodes of Knight Rider. And it was Brandon Tartikoff, who at the time was the president of NBC, who said, this character, Mitch Buchanan, I think would be perfect for David Hasselhoff. Would you meet him? And so we met David, and it was with Grant Tinker and Michael and I, and David came in, and he was so charming in the office, and we knew he was a good actor. We thought he was perfect for Mitch Buchanan, and we made him an offer and worked out a deal, and that's how he joined the cast. So it wasn't really an audition, even though we had considered other names and other people, but he was perfect for the part, and it turned out to be a good decision because David really helped us when we ended up going to get international funding, because Germany loves him. And Germany was our biggest funding when we put that $800,000 together for syndication. Germany put up half of it because David Hasselhoff was the star. And the reason they love him is because his name is Hasselhoff, which is a German name. And he went and sang on the Berlin Wall when the wall came down. In 1989, he sang Looking for Freedom on the Berlin Wall and became a hero in Germany. So that's the reason that Baywatch was able to get funded syndication, was have to do with David Hasselhoff's popularity in Germany. And again, we were the #1 show in Germany, as we were in France, Alert de Malibu it was called, and England and many other countries in Europe. But David Hasselhoff was the right choice at the time, and that's how we got him on the show.
When you said Baywatch Nights, I was a big fan of Baywatch Nights, the second season, which I'll mention in a second. And you wrote it so David could be a detective. Were you ever worried at first maybe two of these running might be a little too much? Was there ever a burnout worry there, or did you keep them separate enough where that wouldn't be a problem?
Well, the shows were distinctly different. Since you saw Baywatch Nights, you know how different it was. Baywatch by Day was a lifeguard action rescue underwater show primarily filmed on the beaches. Baywatch Nights was a detective series, and again, we discovered a young actress who was actually a model, and David Hasselhoff and I were on an airplane coming back from the New York Toy Fair, where we had just launched Baywatch Barbie for Mattel, and which, by the way, became the #1 selling Barbie that year of all toys in the toy market. We were #6 and the #1 Barbie of all time at that point. And so we were coming back on the plane from the success of the New York Toy Fair, and sitting behind us was a girl with a really raspy voice, and we loved her voice. And David Hasselhoff turned around in his seat and introduced himself to her and said, "Hi, I'm David Hasselhoff. Who are you?" "I'm Angie Harmon." "And are you an actress?" "No, I'm a model, like Jason Momoa." "Have you ever acted?" "No." "Would you like to come in and audition? We're putting together a new series called Baywatch Nights, and we have a female lead with a raspy voice, and I think you'd be perfect." So she came in, and she was perfect, and she was terrific. And that started the career of Angie Harmon. And Baywatch Nights was different enough from Baywatch that the two shows existed at the same time. We did both 22 episodes of both series each year. And our ratings stayed the same with Baywatch. Baywatch Nights did not connect with an audience like Baywatch. Baywatch Nights didn't connect like Baywatch. Part of the reason was it wasn't a beach blue sky series. It was more nighttime, dark, and we did X-File kind of shows. We did monsters, we did vampires, we did Vikings, time traveling, really bizarre shows. And that was the fun of Baywatch nights, but again, that's why it was so different. But we didn't have the beach feel and the blue skies feel of Baywatch. So it was never as successful as Baywatch, which is why it only lasted for 2 years, and Baywatch continued on for 6 more years after that without Baywatch nights.
See, and I loved the second season of Baywatch Nights. I thought that was just, as a horror fan, and I was not an X-Files fan, but Baywatch Nights I thought was so cool. I really wish that one would have kept going. What gave you the idea to, because the first season was a normal season, and in the second season, what made you decide to, I'm going to throw in the monsters and everything?
Well, the first season with David Hasselhoff playing a detective was just that. It was Magnum P.I. mixed with Baywatch. And it just didn't catch on. And so we needed to do something in season 2 because the show ratings were strong enough to get a second season, but we needed to do something that would get us higher ratings. So what else was popular on television during that period was X-Files. So we said, I remember the day that we came up with it, what if we do Baywatch meets X-Files? Well, what do you mean? Well, shows about aliens and vampires and monsters and time travel, and we could do all sorts of things and make it really fun with kind of a comedy tone to it. And that's what we did. And that was the second season of Baywatch Nights. But again, the ratings didn't go up. So we did that for another year, and then it ended. And we just went back to Baywatch after that. But we really enjoyed that show. Baywatch Night was a lot of fun to do because it was so unique and different.
Do you think, here overseas is where I had to source mine. Baywatch has had some really nice collector sets put out here in the States. Do you think we'll ever see a Baywatch Nights big collector Blu-ray set or DVD set?
No, I don't think so. There's not enough demand to produce it. Right now, 2 years ago, because of the Baywatch movie with Dwayne Johnson, I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, if you ever saw it.
Oh, my son and I loved it.
Well, we ended up in 2004, we got a phone call again from our agent who said Steven Spielberg would like to meet with you. Can you be at DreamWorks this afternoon at 5 o'clock? And then on the same day. And yeah, so Michael and I jump in our car and we drive over to Universal where DreamWorks was located, and we go to the back lot where DreamWorks is, and their compound and building, and there's Steven Spielberg. And there's Steven Spielberg pitching Michael and I why we should develop and produce a Baywatch movie with him at DreamWorks. And I couldn't believe that there's Steven Spielberg sitting in front of me pitching me to let him do Baywatch as a movie. Steven Spielberg. Of course we'll do that. So we made a deal with DreamWorks, and Michael and I were just blown away by the excitement of just having that opportunity. And then it took 13 years from 2004 to 2016 to develop a script that would be approved, and it ended up being produced by Paramount eventually. So we did 7 years of development at DreamWorks, and then DreamWorks merged with Paramount, and then it became a DreamWorks Paramount co-production for another 3 years. That was now 10 years. And then they split up their relationship. DreamWorks pulled out of the deal with Paramount, but Paramount kept Baywatch under their part of the deal when they split up properties. And then it took another 6 years on top of that, 13 scripts, $13 million in script development with 13 different writers, not getting it right. And we were very frustrated because they wouldn't let us write the movie because we were, quote, television writers. And so they insisted they would have big-time Hollywood screenwriters, and they were paying them $500,000 to $1 million per script, $13 million for 13 scripts, and one script, bad script after another, after another, after another. Finally, after all these years, they allowed us to get involved with the writing of the Baywatch movie, and that's the script that ended up getting produced. And we were lucky enough to get Dwayne Johnson to read it, love the script, and agree to do it. And once we had Dwayne Johnson, Paramount Pictures greenlit the movie in 2016, and Michael and I produced the movie for Paramount. Dwayne Johnson, Zac Efron, Priyanka Chopra, and David Hasselhoff, Pam Anderson did cameos in the movie. And that was a very successful film. We made it for $65 million. Given the fact that we were doing Baywatch for between $800,000 and $1 million per episode, all of a sudden we had $65 million to do a 2-hour movie. So it was astonishing, the difference between doing movies and doing television. But the movie ended up grossing a total of $300 million. It didn't do well domestically because it was an R-rated movie, and it should never have been an R-rated movie. It should have been a PG-13 movie. But an R-rated movie means that no one under 18 can be admitted to the theater without a parent or guardian. Well, Dwayne Johnson's audience was a young audience, so if you eliminate everyone under 18, unless they come with a parent or guardian, you eliminate a lot of Dwayne Johnson's audience. But Paramount insisted that we had to be a gritty, edgier Baywatch to make it different from the television show, and it had to be R-rated. And so the R rating is what held back. We only made $60 million in the United States, which was still good, but when you spend $65 million making the film, $60 million income doesn't even pay for the movie. And so, and then on top of that, you have print and advertising, marketing costs, and other expenses for distribution and splits with the theaters, so it really didn't work. But then we were launched internationally, and Baywatch the movie ended up grossing $240 million internationally, plus the $60 million domestic, so we ended up making about $300 million, and then the film was considered a success, but only because of the international. Then that was the reason that we had the idea, Michael and I, of remastering Baywatch because of all these streaming networks that were now on the air. So you had Amazon Prime, and you had Hulu, and you had Netflix, and you had all these streaming services. And what if we sold Baywatch, the movie, to them? And we did sell it to them, and it's currently still airing Baywatch the movie with Dwayne Johnson on on Amazon Prime. And it was doing so well on Amazon Prime that they said, we'd like to air the original Baywatch series, but we only will air it if you agree to convert it to Ultra HD 4K. And so we did, and we spent a year and almost $6 million remastering Baywatch to Ultra HD. And we did 250 of the episodes. Everything but Baywatch Nights was remastered. So Baywatch Hawaii, Baywatch NBC, all of the episodes, that totaled 260 episodes, and then the 44 we did Baywatch Nights that we didn't do. But in any case, once we had it, we sold it to Amazon Prime, and then we sold it to Hulu, and we sold it to Pluto, and we're currently still running on 3 streaming networks right now as Baywatch Remastered. And then Fremantle, our studio partners that took over from GTG, been our partners for a long time, ever since we went to syndication. They ended up selling it to 126 countries around the world. So we're now running worldwide as Baywatch Remastered, and because of that, so you see how each thing goes to another, to another, to another. We are now in development of a Baywatch series reboot set in Hawaii, which is hopefully going to go forward with Amazon Prime or Hulu next year as summer of 2021, a new Baywatch series with a new cast, no David Hasselhoff or Pam Anderson or anybody else, with a Hawaiian feel, different from our Hawaiian Baywatch Hawaii original show, which still starred David Hasselhoff. So it's a different show, but we're in the process right now of developing it for a streaming network. So you may see Baywatch Ohana, which is Baywatch Friends, next year on one of those streaming networks, 2021, as a new summer series.
Now, let me ask you, the Baywatch, my son, he would have been 9 at the time. We're both big rock fans, so of course we were going to go see Baywatch. What made you decide to make that one more of a kind of a self-aware comedy, where they're telling the cops they're on lifeguard pursuit and, kind of overly camp it up? Was that your guys' decision, or is that something the studio wanted?
Well, it was what the studio wanted, because they wanted a comedy. They wanted an R-rated comedy that had edgy grittiness. So that's why you had some scenes that were specifically put in the movie. For example, when the young character falls on the chaise lounge, and he gets stuck in the chaise lounge because he's turned on looking at DJ, played by so they had the penis. That played for comedy, but again, because there was a penis in the scene, it was an automatic R-rated film. If those two scenes weren't in the film, it would have been a PG-13 movie. But Paramount insisted it had to be a comedy, insisted it had to be R-rated, and insisted to the point where it didn't work domestically, and should have never had an R-rated movie. By the way, if you look at all of Dwayne Johnson's movies, they're all PG-13, including Fast and Furious. All but Baywatch.
Now,
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just finishing that thought. But any other questions you have about any of these things?
Two more. One to deal with the movie. Pam Anderson, who I still to this day say is the most beautiful woman on the face of God's green earth, pops up at the end of it. Was that in the hopes of maybe doing a part 2, or was it just a little quick cameo kind of nod?
It was just a quick cameo kind of nod. It was never set up to do a sequel because it's too hard to get Dwayne Johnson. He's so busy with so many things, and he's very expensive. I mean, Dwayne Johnson gets $25 million a movie up front. So that's a very hard thing to repeat. And we wanted to get back to a television series. So we were hoping that Baywatch the movie would trigger a new Baywatch series. And in fact, it triggered Baywatch Remastered and a new series. So we really ended up getting what we wanted, even though we didn't do a sequel to it. Had it been a runaway hit, and if we had made $500 million to $1 billion, like most of Dwayne Johnson's movies do, then Paramount had the option to do a sequel if they wanted to.
I have to say in closing here, Baywatch is, I mean, without a doubt, it's going to go down in history as one of the most iconic shows in history. What do you think was the appeal of the show that made it click with so many different generations of fans, different parts of the world? What do you think was it that made it resonate so well with everyone?
We know what it is because we did focus groups all over the world. England, France, Germany, the United States, all did focus groups year after year after year. Every year we did focus groups. What do you like about the show? What are the characters you like? What don't you like about the show? What would you like to see? And the consensus was that it was the blue skies, beach, atmosphere, the California culture, the outdoors of the show, ending every episode with a beautiful sunset, with water and an outdoor feel. That was unbelievable, the number one reason that people loved the show. The second reason was they were able to watch the show with their kids and their grandparents. So you had generations, grandparents, parents, and kids all watching Baywatch at the same time. The parents loved Pamela Anderson like you and the other sexy girls, which is why we got the reputation of Baywatch being a TNA show. Even though that was part of the show, it was never the driving force behind the show. And then the kids loved the kids in the show, and David Hasselhoff's relationship with his young son, Hobie, was a third reason, because women loved that he was a single father raising a young boy. And Jeremy Jackson, who played Hobie, started on the show at 8 years old and ended at 22 years old doing that role. So he literally grew up on the show. And he ended up becoming a lifeguard, but could never live up to his father's, legendary hero image as Mitch Buchanan. So, but those are the reasons that people watch Blue Skies, outdoor, single parent, and the other thing was having heroes, American heroes, first responders. Before first responders were as famous as they became after 9/11, Baywatch was the first show that really featured first responders in that way on the front lines of rescues. Another reason that people like the show, women in particular, is we treated women the same as men on the show. Equal rank, equal pay, equal heroism. So you could have Alexandra Paul saving somebody or Nicole Eggert saving somebody, and then you have David Hasselhoff saving somebody. So they're all heroes in saving lives, but they were flawed in their heroism. And so we would do storylines about their flawed characters. So those are all the reasons that came out in the focus groups of why people loved the show as much as they did, having a family of lifeguards that were also flawed as much as they were heroes.
Baywatch is an iconic show. It deserves all the credit it gets for as big an influence as it was. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I want everybody to pick up the book, From Bar Mitzvah to Baywatch. Is there anything else you got coming on the horizon that you can plug?
I'm doing a couple of different projects. I'm 75 years old now and legally blind, so I'm not as active as I used to be. But if Baywatch is rebooted to Baywatch next year in Hawaii, then we're already in place to be the executive producers and co-showrunners of a new series, and that will be our 33rd year producing Baywatch since we started in 1988. And in 2021, we'd still be doing Baywatch. It's amazing. And given the fact that God bless my Uncle Sherwood for suggesting we go back to Grant Tinker and buy our rights back and take the show to syndication, had he not said that, Baywatch would have been canceled after the 24 episodes we did on NBC, like so many shows. Oh, as a matter of fact, just one last side note. We had a 100-episode party, and it was congratulating Baywatch and the Hollywood Reporter, and all these people take out ads in the Hollywood Reporter congratulating when you reach 100 episodes. Most all the shows have those Hollywood Reporter salutes to the show at 100 episodes. Well, when we did our 100-episode salute in the Hollywood Reporter, NBC, without us knowing, took out a full-page ad in the Hollywood Reporter, and what it said on the ad was "Oops!" exclamation point, and underneath the "Oops," and then it says "Who knew?" And the NBC Peacock had a little bubble over its head saying "Who knew?" Mm-hmm. And then, "Congratulations on your 100th episode. Don't forget who gave you your start. Love, NBC." So we thought that was very classy of NBC to say that after canceling the show after 24 episodes. But again, that's the best thing that ever happened to us. And here we are 32 years later still doing the same show because of our Uncle Sherwood.
That is amazing. And I want to thank you once again for taking the time out of your schedule to talk with all of us today. I really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. I love to talk about this. And check out Baywatch Remastered. It's running on Amazon Prime and Hulu and Pluto Networks right now, and it looks gorgeous because of the remastering and because we shot the original show in 35 millimeter. It looks like we shot the show yesterday, and it's the most beautiful show on television on any network or streaming network is the Baywatch Remastered.
Well, I guarantee you I will check it out this evening.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. You have been listening to the Chronicles of Hollywood History. Thank you from Gomez Richmond Productions.